The project is called IMPALA. IMPALA stands for Informal Mobile Podcasting and Learning Adaptation. There is a website as well. I'll show you in a minute the website where there are a lot of resources and so on. The project was started early 2006, so it's few years now, but we have been carrying out several projects, initially funded by the Higher Education Academy, and also we got bits of funding from the University of Leicester, one of the settles, Genie Settle, and also a bit of money from JISC as well. I've written my email address for further contact later on. And this is the website address. The background to the project was, at the time we were looking at the new learning technologies in learning context. There was this interest in podcasting was coming up late 2005, early 2006, and so on. So what we wanted to do was we wanted to look at the impact of podcasting on student learning. The main reason is the technologies like podcasting were developed outside education. They were mainly for entertainment or for journalists or people just who are interested in broadcasting their voice mainly. And that approach is slightly new for, at least the digital audio is new for educational context at that time. So we wanted to see how it works with students, whether actually students like it or how they learn. And then also we found quite a lot of approaches to using podcasting at that time were to do with recording long lectures and make this available as podcasts. We wanted to see whether there are other models of using podcasting can be developed as well. And also we want to test them and see whether they can be transferred in different educational contexts. And also we were interested in developing subject-specific exemplars to see whether the use of audio was specifically appealing to certain subject areas and so on. So within IMPALA family of projects, we have got 4 projects so far. The first one is the IMPALA General project, which we started in 2006. Where we worked with 10 subject areas, subject disciplines across a number of universities. The second one was, following on from that, was the use of podcasting for geography, earth and environmental science areas, because we found there was an interest from geologists and geographers in for podcasting, for things like field work. And the third one was our own settle in genetics. They were interested in the use of podcasting for student-created podcasts instead of doing presentations, creating podcasts as a form of assessing their work. So genetics and biomedical sciences. And the fourth one is the one that we are carrying out at the moment, which is to do with using student-generated podcasts for transition into higher education. Usual approaches to transition or helping students to learn about higher education is through things like open days and brochures and websites and various information usually sanctioned and developed by the official sources. And we thought students might like to listen to the senior students who have made the transition not long in the recent past, and then how we can use podcasts to support their transition. So these are the 4 projects that we are working on. In terms of the disciplines, in the universities, we had several modules within Leicester University itself, and also from Kingston University, Nottingham, Gloucestershire, Royal Veterinary College, and also Leeds University and Sussex University. And the disciplines, you can see there were science disciplines right through to various humanities and veterinary sciences. So this involved a lot of mathematics and various different kinds of discipline areas. So by working with these colleagues from different areas, we were able to develop a number of approaches to using podcasting. So what I think Pete will talk about a bit later. I think we have, in the end, we with the experience that we captured during that year, we wrote a book on podcasting. I'll talk to you about it later. I'll take some examples from the book as well. The book was published last year. What is podcasting? I think usually if you do a definition of podcasting on the web, usually it goes to Wikipedia or some kind of a technical definition. Usually involves podcasting as a delivery mechanism which is different from other digital media files, which means podcasting as a way of distributing digital files or audio or video files on the internet using syndication feeds, and also they are downloaded automatically through a subscription service. And the third one is content to be automatically delivered to a user's computer as soon as a new content is posted on the web. So basically the definition of podcast, the way podcast technically differs from other ways of providing content on the web is that the way it's distributed on the web, and also the way the availability of podcast is announced to a subscriber or person who wants to receive podcasts, and the way you access podcasts as well automatically. So, but what we found was when our colleagues work in IMPALA project, and also when we looked at other literature as well, a lot of the academics were using podcasts in a more simple way. For them, it was a media file, and also it was delivered on the internet, and it seems to be quite short, more or less, and so on. So we, in a way, came up with a slightly different definition of a podcast in academic context. So I think it will be for academics, for us as academics, working within limited technical capabilities perhaps, and also institutional constraints and so on. I think a podcast, we can look at podcast as a digital media file basically, and then it plays sounds or sound and visuals, and made available from a website via the internet. So therefore we can use an institutional BLE instead of another service. And also it can be opened and downloaded and played on a computer and or a user-owned device like a iPod or any kind of MP3 player. And also it can be played back directly from a website as well. Yeah. So I think what we can do is we can kind of simplify a definition of a podcast. So therefore we can customize to suit our needs. Although if you talk to a computer scientist, I'm sure there isn't any computer scientists here. Right, okay. They will completely disagree with this kind of a definition. But I think usually what happens is when technologies develop certain kind of technologies, it's our task, I think, it's within our right to tame the way we want it, and then the way we want to use it, and the way students would like to use it. So a lot of the podcasts that we were working on fell within this kind of a simple definition of a podcast, and it made things easier for everyone almost. And also I think it will be interesting to compare how podcasting differs from early approaches to using audio, because in the end what's inside a podcast, which is audio, is use of audio for education, is not new. It's been happening for decades. So but there were certain things, certain features of podcasting which makes it different from early approaches, and therefore the take up is high. So the first one is if you look at the content capture, in the podcasting approach, the content can be captured using a computer, sound recorder, and so on. And also it can be done anywhere, and also the free software are available on the web, and tools as well. So for example, if I were to use this kind of a digital recorder, it's it's quite easy to develop a podcast. And also you can use a laptop or a computer or any kind of a device. But in the early approaches, we needed specialist equipment and also studios and booking time and cost for it and all that kind of things. And also in podcasting, the distribution is either through feeder service or VLE. And but in the early approaches, you need to post the tapes to students. And the third one is the access. Access is either through an aggregated service like an iTunes or Google Reader or something like that, and or you can download from the web. But in the early approaches, either you have to wait for the postal services to arrive, and also go and collect personally, depending on which country you live in, perhaps. And also the podcast can be used using a mobile device like an MP3 player or computer or any kind of device, but in the early approaches, a cassette player and a Walkman. So then the number of files that you can carry with you during the day is quite limited, whereas in this case it's quite unlimited almost. So therefore the logistics of use, I think for all of those reasons, is easy, flexible, indexing is easy, and usage is almost unlimited, whereas previous approach is almost not very comparable. In podcasting, because of the easiness of use and also the device ownership by students as well, the content we can use not only the staff members but students as well as creators of content. And there are quite a lot of examples as well, and also non-specialists and in context, whereas in early approaches usually it's teachers and institutional stakeholders. So in terms of applications, there are many applications for using podcasts, but usually early approaches were mainly instructional and motivational. So for all those reasons, there is a potential for learning in new ways because of all of these reasons coming together. So it's quite remarkable if we try to do podcasting with students and how they actually make use of them. So within our project, what we had our research design was quite simple. We did workshops with academic staff to develop podcasts. We had one staff member, a senior staff member. In fact, at the time he was the deputy vice chancellor of the university, one of the pro vice chancellors of the university who was using podcasting. So we captured this approach, his model, and then we ran workshops with our IMPALA partner colleagues, and they then developed their own ways of developing podcasts. And then they made these podcasts available from a VLA to students and let them know that the podcasts were available. And then students use podcasts, and we did a questionnaire at the beginning of the semester or the semesters on students' access to the technology. And then in the middle of the semester, we did focus groups with students on their use of podcasts and what they say about how they learn from podcasts. And then we fed back the information, what we learned from this focus groups, to staff members midway, so they improved their approach to using podcasts. And then end of the semester, we did personal interviews with a small number of students from each module, and then we did an end of semester interview with staff members as well. So it was quite a simple design, but we managed to collect quite a lot of important, useful data, and that's what in the end the book, each chapter is based on these the data from these modules. So the podcasting approaches, all the different kinds of podcasting that our colleagues did fit into some kind of a teaching and learning. They fit into their way of teaching and learning in some way. They try to integrate this into their teaching and learning. So this is one way of looking at it. So if you look at the core teaching and learning events and activities are all of these, like lectures, seminars, and so on. But you might think about other things as well. So there on the left hand side we have the tutors who are contributing, on the right hand side we have the students who are contributing. Well, there were some approaches where recording the whole lecture and make these lectures available to students for listening again. And that approach was done by, not by lecturers, but students. What the students did at Royal Veterinary College of London was, one of the students was quite interested in not only the veterinary subject, but also the media and learning as well. So she went around and asked staff members whether they mind recording their lectures, and some of them of course didn't like to listen to their voice again, but there were others who were willing to do that. So what she did was she borrowed one of these from her learning technology services, and then put something like that around, and put this around the neck of the lecture, and this press record button when the lecturer started lecturing. And then because this stayed with the lecturer, it captured the sound very well. And then after the end of the lecture, what she did was she edited the sound using sound editing software, which she learned herself, and then cut out some of the bits that that were interruptions and the things that were repeating and so on. So that one lecture she edited to about 30 minutes or 40 minutes and made this available through the institutional VLE. She had the support of the learning technology services as well. Now I hear now, I mean, this happened about 2 years ago, but this has happened quite across other modules as well. So a lot of the lectures are available, and we asked them what they actually, why they wanted to listen to lectures. Well, they used lectures not as a reason for podcasts, as a reason for not attending lectures, but because for their practicals, they drive several hours to farms and so on, so they can listen to the lectures while they are driving. And also some of the information that they receive in lectures were useful for practical work in situation as well, during lambing seasons and so on. And also they use the lectures as revision material, so almost like a book. So they used in different ways. So that was quite an interesting approach. The second one was lecturers recording 5 or 10 minutes of summary of lectures at the end of a lecture. So the lecturer would go back after the lecture and remembers the things that he or she wasn't able to tell students. So immediately he would record this as a podcast, and also things like further reading and that kind of material. So students use these also as a guide for revisions. And the other approach was preparatory material. So these three approaches to using podcasts require students to use these podcasts before they actually come to the classroom. So preparation for seminars and workshops, and preparatory material for presentations, and also preparatory material for assessments. The next approach is the use of podcasts while they are engaging in a particular activity themselves, during the activity. So for laboratory work, in chemistry we had a lecturer developed a podcast for almost like lab sheets, and also computer work. We had colleagues from Nottingham University develop podcasts to support their learning of certain software. So instead of the problem with that situation was that there were quite a lot of students, and it was difficult to provide personal support during the lecture, during the practical session. So having these audiovisual help was useful for students and staff to support students in more qualitatively better way as well. And also use of podcasts for field work. This is mainly useful in geography and geology. The next category is quite different, so that's why there are quite a lot of it. And these were using podcasts not for as main part of main teaching and learning activities, but sort of outside the main framework of teaching and learning. So they are a little bit informal. For example, this is the first one, exploiting self-study learning material. Here what the colleagues at Royal Veterinary College of London did was they had about 200 years of worth of collection of anatomical material, usually stored, preserved in jars what they call pods. And usually the understanding this requires staff support. Somebody has to explain what it is. So what they thought was they can make this material available to better access to this material by making podcasts, video podcasts. So they found that the use of this material became quite high as part of that. But the actual cost of developing this material were quite high, but they were reusable. They think that their lifetime is quite high, quite long, and so on. So there are quite different range of material, the ways of using podcasts in a more informal way, and then in these cases, a lot of the time the content contributors are students and stakeholders as well. If I were to take this example, introducing informal content to improve curriculum here, the colleagues at University of Gloucester, what they did was they, as part of an environmental course, what he did was he went around and interviewed people in the business community, local community and so on, and talk about things to do with environment and local area, and made this available to students. So students in fact looked forward to listening to this material, almost like radio programs, and these were quite useful for students, especially when the several environmental reports came in, and so on. So this is the kind of different ways of our colleagues used and developed podcasts and made this available to students. So I'm not going to explain all of these things, but I think this might be quite an interesting one for feedback. The colleagues at Chester University, what they did was they used podcasts as a way of providing feedback to students, and students really like it because they can hear the papers being, the sound of paper being used or written in the podcast as well, and also they thought the podcast was very personal because they like to hear the tutor's voice, and also they were able to make sense of podcasts as well. One of the things they said was sometimes you can't read your lecturer's handwriting, so in this case there wasn't a problem with it. So these were different approaches to using podcasts, which became quite useful. In fact, if I show you the alongside the book, we have created a website as well for the book. For the book, so it's I can make these resources available, and if you go to the book's website, so that's the book's website, and on the left hand side there are several resources available. One of which is introduction to each of the chapters, and also we have got a quite an interactive model of developing podcasts as well. So for example, how you might look at the pedagogical rationale for developing podcasts, and looking at the medium and convergence and so on. But apart from that, we have chapter summaries as well, and also podcasts as well. So there are several podcasts available if you want to listen to. Perhaps we can do that towards the end, perhaps, right? Okay. Yeah. So maybe I wonder if there are any questions so far. Yeah. Okay.
When you've got their reflections and e-portfolios, is that reflections that the students make themselves?
Yeah, students themselves. Yes. What they did was they made presentations in front of colleagues, their peers, and then the other students, the peers, ask a lot of questions, and the whole thing was recorded, and that was made available for students to listen to, and then based on those podcasts, if you like, the sound file, and also so they would make a reflection and then write it in their reflective. Yeah. Okay, I'll continue then. So as an example, this is the approach I just talked to you about. The University of Leicester, Professor John Fothergill, he used to be Pro Vice Chancellor for Teaching and Learning, and when he became the Pro Vice Chancellor, he still wanted to carry out teaching, so he put his he redesigned his module, one semester module, completely differently and to deliver online, and he developed e-lectures, and then carried on teaching. But after about 4 years of teaching, he thought the material he produced for his students became quite not really outdated, but it's on the web. So he wanted to give some life to his course. So that's when he came up with the idea of using podcasts, weekly podcasts. So I'll just so this is a slide from the his e-lectures. So e-lectures would contain the a little bit of his whoever is giving the lecture at that time for that part, the face, and then the face disappears, and then the visuals and the transcript of the presentation as well, narrative as well, and this is all online. Students will use this material, study by themselves. Although these students are on-campus students, they take the course in a more flexible way. So they don't actually go to lectures; they do it in their own time. But he found unless you give them some kind of a motivation on a weekly basis, it will be a bit difficult for them to organize their learning. Otherwise, they will leave all the studies to the last minute, and so on. So that's when he came up with the idea of podcasting. So the rationale for using podcasts were to enliven the course, and also he would use the announcement page to make various information available, and also the podcasts added to that, and also he provided feedback on their work, and also activities and assessments, assignments. And also he wanted to bring some kind of informality into this formal learning as well. And also there were certain concepts that were quite important for students to go through. So he wanted to reinforce those content as well, concepts. And also he wanted to add a little bit of a fun to learning. He's quite a good lecturer, but by providing all these lectures in an online way, he kind of lost that he lost his interaction with students as well. So he wanted to bring that humor he would normally bring into classroom. So his lectures or podcasts were quite short, 10 minutes or less, and usually the first 2 minutes is the beginning, or 1 minute, and he will introduce what the podcast is about, and also usually he will bring up some kind of a news element, news item related to his subject. He was teaching optical fiber communications, so he will bring something sciencey, some technological stuff, and then in the middle was the main part where he will provide feedback to students and also advice on what they should be doing in the next week, and also exams as well. And the end was usually a joke, and so on. So the news element were things to do with course context, situating what they learned to the real world. And for example, he when at the birthday of the fiber optics, he used something about it, and also internet superhighway, and the last year or the year before there was a lunar eclipse, and this kind of things. The middle part was the main content part, but not content in the sense of teaching something, but things about the content, So he will talk about the students' achievements in the middle part. He signposts to the course. So he will say during next week or the next 2 weeks, ideally you should be studying these units, and so on. And these are the things he incorporated into the middle part of the podcast. And also he would advise the students how to pace their studies, and also he says something about if they haven't studied some of the sections in the last week, then how they might be able to study them as well. So the fun part was a joke. He asked students to email him jokes as well, but he subscribes to various jokes and so on. So that became quite useful. The useful thing about podcast was when he recorded these jokes part, the last part, he recorded them in certain way, so he doesn't have to record them every year. So he can reuse the jokes. So because the students are new, so they don't know that the joke was used before. But I think the important point is the technology podcasting enables us to record files or sections separately that can be reused. So in fact, once you get used to it, it's quite time you can save time as well. So I will make these slides available to all of you. So these are the things he would normally say in podcasts, but this is he transcribed just for the purpose of this slide. But he doesn't have to transcribe this. But this is the kind of things he will say in the feedback part of the podcast. So it's more or less group feedback rather than individual feedback. And also, so the first part is this, in the feedback, something nice about it, and these were the things, something he found the students were not really getting right. So he would say you are a bit more hazy on what dispersion is, and so on. So this is something we interviewed the students at the end of the course, and this is the thing. This is some of the things that students said about the podcast. So the first one is about flexibility. Across the board, all the podcast research we have done, flexibility came quite high in terms of students' ranking. Although we can say that, well, it's just flexibility, it doesn't really help in a conceptual way. But flexibility itself is an important part of learning. So this podcast enables students to pace time, and is even geographical location. Some of the students said, one said he would listen to podcasts when he was working in Sainsbury, stocking stuff in the supermarket, and also some of the thing walking to university as well, depending on where you are, but also on the bus and so on, and also the time. And the middle one is quite interesting, the one I have highlighted in there. And although in this particular case the podcast was only, in terms of time, it's only 10 minutes of their learning time, or in terms of time of content, whereas the lectures and everything else is much more than that. But that 10 minutes was important. By using podcasts, for 10-minute podcasts, the lecturer really captured the students, and you can see that what they are saying is that it changed the way they felt that the module is taught, and then they thought the lecturer was very interesting in person. And also some of the students had emailed these podcasts, because you can download them as well, to their families and friends abroad. And because this kind of way of learning is completely different from the way they were used to learn. So and then in the next year, what happened was he had an over subscription for the module. So it's quite a good way of marketing as well, perhaps. And then they talk about what the podcasts were about and how it helped. It's this kind of motivational thing in a way. And if you can understand graphs, which I can just about, what the lecturer did was he plotted the students' achievements in terms of grades in the module, or since he started in 1998, 1990 and 2000. That's when he was using the teaching the traditional way. So there was no blackboard or anything involved during this time. And this top bit was when he started to use blackboard and lectures, podcasts. So the last 4 years, the podcasts. So what the graphs show is that the percentage of students who are getting higher marks is higher, became higher and higher. And last year, he did not have any receipts at all. So in a way, you could say that creating podcasts is time consuming, but it releases your time because you would not have to do lots of remarking of assignments and so on. There's something more. Okay. I can show you some quantitative. Are there any questions so far up to here? I'll just show you some of the quantitative data. I think in terms of research, this might be interesting. So, I mean, we were interested to see the access to the internet. I mean, you need to have access to internet in order to be able to use podcasts anyway. So, if I see, maybe Zoom. Okay, hopefully, yeah, okay. So you can see this bit is the unlimited broadband. So a lot of the students had access to unlimited broadband. I don't know about here, but I mean, do the students at this university, are there a lot of residential students, or do they commute from elsewhere?
There's not as many residential as at Leicester.
Ah, okay, right. So there are a lot of people coming from homes and so on. So they probably have access to internet in that case. So these students, these are the different universities. So so you can see the numbers there. I think this is about 2 years old data. So I think if we were to repeat this questionnaire again, I think the numbers with access to unlimited broadband will be quite high. So we also wanted to know their access to personal computer. So a lot of them had access to a desktop computer or a laptop computer, both and so on. So because access to at least a computer is important to use podcasts. And then we were interested to know whether they had access to laptop. Their laptop was wireless enabled. 2 years ago that was the case, and I think now it will be probably quite higher than that. I think if we were to repeat this survey now, I think we might include something like netbook as well, the little computers. And the access to MP3 player ownership, you can see that it's quite high as well. I think it will be more if we were to repeat this experiment again, the survey again. I think a lot of students will be using mobile phones with access to wireless internet as well. So and then however, one of the things that came up quite surprisingly was that their internet activities. So so a lot of them were playing games and across different universities. But what we didn't find was, what we found was that a lot of the students were not actually contributing to, not using podcasts in a not many students would subscribe to podcasts that are available on the internet. So that particular activity is new to them. So their usual way of using sound files is copying from a CD to through a computer, or copy from somebody, or copy maybe legally, but not really subscribe to podcasts. So that was a barrier in a way, because if you were to learn in a new way, if you have that particular habit, it would be useful or helpful. So internet activities, so playing games, online shopping, listening to podcasts was this yellow part. But they probably said the listening to the course related podcasts, but not the not general podcasts, but the numbers were quite low. And also contributing to wiki, you can see that the blue one here is quite small there, that bit there. So they would use things like wikis to read Wikipedia, but not actually contribute. So that was the case 2 years ago. Maybe it may be different now, but it will be interesting to see, because all these are variables affect the way of using the MP3 players or digital content. So the use of MP3 player is mainly, this is what I was saying, blue bit, to listen to music transferred from a computer rather than podcasting. Anyway, but their frequency of internet use was quite high. So all we needed was to give a nudge in the right direction in order to be able to, so that they will use podcasts, because using internet was not a barrier for them. And a lot of them said they did not have any problems. But they also said, we were interested in those who did not listen. We were interested to see why they didn't. So the blue bit there says they did not see the relevance of podcasts for learning of the module. So I think in this case, either the lecturer had not made it clear, or they didn't see the relevance by listening to it. That's where the model I mentioned is important, where we say that it's quite important to relate the podcast to the module, and also other learning activities as well, integral part. And also some of them said they didn't know the podcasts were available on the VLA. But what we found was sometimes lecturers make podcasts available, but they don't necessarily tell them. Well, they don't tell the students enough adequate times. And I was quite interested on this. But then I began to notice that when on BBC, for example, on news and other programs, they always mention that the program is also available as a podcast or a download. So perhaps it's quite important to remind them that these are available as well. And also what we found was, although we sometimes think that the younger students are digital natives and they know everything about computers and mobile phones, but we found some of the students were until we showed them how to use a mobile phone to download podcasts and also create your playlists. It wasn't something they actually thought about before, because they have got 100 other things to do. So I think it's quite important to show them sometimes what you can do. And location of listening. So quite a interesting percentage, quite high in some cases, listen to always off the campus. So I think in a way that we realize that the podcast served their purpose, because it helped them to learn away from campus. And in the case of, so there are mixed responses as well. And the methods of listening, well, there were mixed responses. But you can see quite a lot of students listen to podcasts from VLA. I think there may be several reasons. One is they think that the podcasts are to do with learning. So all the things that you to do with learning you do on a computer. So therefore you should automatically use a computer to listen. And also some of the podcasts need to be listened to on the computer, because they were to do with practicals. But I think it's also the purpose as well, so it depends on the purpose. So that was a quite interesting observation. And okay, that's yeah. I think I'll just quickly go through these remaining few slides. Oops. Yeah, these were the key benefits we found when we interviewed both students and staff. The learner control and flexibility was one of the important things, but it helped them learn. And the second one was new ways of, for lecturers, it provided a new way of presenting information. For students, it helped them to learn in a new way, which they haven't thought before. So for some students that was helpful, for students who started a little bit later in the module, international students, and also there are, I'm sure you agree, there are some students who migrate from modules later in the course, so if they have done the wrong choice perhaps, for them it was useful. And also it's a new literacy, but it's a quite an interesting area for research as well. Being sound, it motivated them, and also it engaged them better as well. And also some students like to learn by listening to sound, and they like the sound of the lecture as well. And finally, the reusability was quite an important for lecturers. They were able to use them again and again. Just to finish with, this is what we are working on at the moment. The current research is on, it's called IMPALA. For T stands for IMPALA for transition. It's to do with the transition to higher education. It's what we are trying to do is tapping into students' knowledge, uncodified knowledge of second and third years about their transition, their personal experience of coming to university first year, second year, and so on, and capture that, because I'm sure you agree the first year experience is quite important for their adapting to university and academic success. So we do this with the higher education academic funded funds and our own gene settle funds, and within the biological sciences, but we like to try this approach at different other subject disciplines as well. And also another thing we are interested in is the transition from the university to employment as well. So I'll show you the website for it. And here our main research questions are how student created podcasts support new undergraduates transition to higher education, and also the value of these podcasts for that particular purpose as well. And then there are a number of more research questions as well, which is from this the book, but I photocopied few pages. Right, I think I'll So perhaps you might want to have a look at these research questions, and I'll leave the others can distribute. If you are interested in getting involved in research or doing research in this kind of area, I think it's quite interesting to work together. I'll just show you the website for the latest project. That's the podcast that we have produced for students thinking about coming to university, and there are 13 podcasts and there is at least one in each of these, and for some teaching and learning there are more than one. And at the moment we are producing a set of podcasts for students to help choose their modules and information about exams and so on. So more results to come from that particular project. So that's what we do at Leicester University Beyond Distance on podcasting. It's going on for about 3 years so far. So I wonder if there are any questions at this moment, or
have any questions? Any further questions?
Just little things, although I can relate the fact
that's fine.
maybe missed a very important part. But my little question is there a way how students can communicate with their professor over the web, or when the sessions are given, broadcasted?
Yeah,
so way how they can ask him questions
right, okay.
immediately or
After that. Yeah. Well, I mean, the usual approach is, as you know, using a discussion board or email would be the thing. But I think students, I mean, potentially can use podcasts as well if they have a question. I mean, it's quite an interesting question, because you might have a question, but I think sometimes it is hard to type it up in the more academic language, I think. So if you have a mobile phone or something like a device like that, you probably can record the question and then either email it to the lecturer, or if the lecturer provides a space in the VLA, and then that can be posted as well. I mean, we had another project called to do with work-based learning. Students in that particular case, they were teacher assistants who were, they were teaching assistants. They are helping teachers in classrooms, and they were doing a foundation degree in educational studies, and they were given PDAs to capture the classroom evidence, and as part of that they recorded students' conversations or interviews and so on, and then they emailed this to their tutors. So I think in a way they did something similar. So that is possible, and it's quite a powerful way of communicating with the lecturer. Yeah.
The other question is, since this one, it is solely internet communication.
Yes.
Forecasting and received by students.
Yes.
Okay. At certain part, I guess you mentioned something that some students could follow their lectures through while they're working at Salisbury or anywhere.
Yeah.
How could they follow that? iPod stuff.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe I missed that part. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
So she answered.
Yeah.
Okay.
And also, they also, some of the geography students, what they did was, which I didn't include in this presentation, was that they were asked to produce a podcast, a video podcast of their fieldwork experience. So they created this 5-minute podcast and sent to the lecturer, and then the lecturer would post them on the VLE, and then other students will comment on this. So it's in that case it's a student-generated podcast. And also I think the interesting thing is all they used was a usual digital camera, and the free software that comes with a laptop, something like Windows Movie Maker or something like that. So it was quite easy for them, and they did it in the evening when they have done the field work and coming back to their accommodation, probably before having a drink, I think.
Well, thanks ever so much.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks for inviting me.
Yes, I mean, one thing that PAL's shown us is that there's an awful lot of different things that are going on within the project in a range of different places, and there's always that offer there to be part of projects if people have things they want to. But also, all those different case studies have been written up into this book, which is available. PAL's brought some along now, and the normal price is £25, but £20 tonight if people want to have a copy of that. And there's also a lot of papers that have been produced as a result of the research, and you're going to make, they're available through the IMPALA.ac.uk website, so if people want to download the academic papers, you can.
Yeah.
Where will you put the slides?
Yeah, what I'll do is I'll create a new web page and email Pete.
Yes.
Okay. Give me a couple of days. Yes. Yeah, and then I'll put them on the web, on the site to download. But I can just leave them as well if you want.
Yes.
Yeah, 1, 2, these 3, and 4.
Yes.
If people want to rather photocopy them.
Yes.
That's yeah.
Okay. Well, thanks ever so much again for coming. Nice select little audience. We've got another session in a fortnight, very similar sort of project, but different in a way, sort of relating to what you were saying about specifically giving feedback through audio files, and Bob Rotherham's coming to talk about.
He's working on a JISC-funded project on audio feedback, isn't it? Yeah.
Yes. So That's the concept.
Mm-mm.
That's the next one. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you.